Fine. Guys, in the last session, we discussed about what is a Spring Boot and why we need to go for Spring Boot. Initially, we started our discussion with the Spring Framework, how to develop a application by using Spring Framework. When we develop our application by using Spring Framework, then we need to follow some configurations. Those configurations are manual configurations. Programmer is responsible to perform configurations when we are developing the application by using Spring Framework. Those configurations are not only for one application, those configurations are common for all the applications. So to simplify those configurations, the Spring team came up with a concept called Spring Boot. Now, so can you please tell me what is the Spring Boot and why people are crazy about the Spring Boot? The main advantage with the Spring Boot is because of its auto configuration. Whatever the configuration that is required for the application, Boot is going to take care of that. So we can develop applications quickly by using Spring Boot. That concept is called rapid application development. What is the meaning of rapid application development? Quickly we can develop our applications by using Spring Boot. That's why Boot is having lot of demand in the market. So if anybody asks you, what is the Spring Boot? Spring Boot is one approach to develop Spring applications with less configurations. Whatever you can do by using Spring Framework, same thing can be done by using Spring Boot also. The advantage is auto configuration. So can I say Spring Boot is a replacement for the Spring? No, Spring Boot is not replacement for the Spring because Spring Boot internally using Spring only. So that's why we can say Spring Boot is extension for the Spring framework. Good. Now, what are the advantages we have with the Spring Boot? POM starters. What is the benefit with the POM starters? It is simplifying Maven configurations in the project. You no need to add so many dependencies in the project. You no need to add so many dependencies in the project. So if you add one dependency, it will download all the required jar files to develop our application. And what is the second advantage? Dependency version conflict solution. You no need to specify which version of dependency you want to use. You just specify the dependency name. Boot is going to identify which version is required. What is the latest version which is compatible with the Spring Boot. It is going to provide that. And third advantage is auto configuration. What is the meaning of auto configuration? Can you open the door? What is the meaning of auto configuration? Auto configuration means based on the pom.xml, it will identify what configuration is required for our application. So can you tell some examples for auto configuration? Creating the connection pool, starting the server, starting the IOC container, providing the security, all these logics you no need to write. Boot is going to provide based on the configuration. Another advantage with the Spring Boot, embedded server. What is the meaning of embedded server? When you develop a web application, you need to deploy that web application by using server. When you develop a web application, you need to deploy that application by using server. But if you go for the Spring Boot, do we need that server? Not required. Boot will provide one default server to run our application. The server which is providing by the Spring Boot is called as a embedded server. What are the embedded servers providing by Spring Boot? Tomcat, Jetty, Netty, like that there are some embedded servers providing by Spring Boot. Next one, what is the actuator? What is actuator? Actuators are used to monitor our application. Actuators are used to monitor our application. Good. Now here how our application is running, what is the health, how many beans loaded, how many URL patterns available, how many threads are running, what is the heap size, how much memory free in the heap, how much memory occupied by objects, all such kind of information we can get from the application by using actuators. Basically, these are called as production ready features. Whenever you go for actuator, people will call as production ready features. When our application is running in the production, we can get all its features by using these actuators. So official definition, Actuators are used to get production ready features of our application. Good. So we understood the introduction part. What is a Spring Boot? What are the advantages of using Spring Boot? Now we want to develop our project by using Spring Boot. Spring Boot application we can develop in two ways, guys. One is by using start.spring.io website, that is called Spring Initializer website. From this website, you can create the project and you can download that project and import that project into IDE. That is one option. And the second option is by using Spring Toolsuite IDE also, you can create the Spring Boot application. Now, if you use the STS IDE also, internally, it will communicate with this website only to create the project. So if you are creating Spring Boot application, internet connection is mandatory for your system. If your system is having internet, then only you can create the Spring Boot application. Otherwise, you cannot create that. The reason, if I am using STS IDE also to create the project, internally it will communicate with this website to create the project. This website is called as Spring Initializer website. Now, let me create a project by using Initializer website. So that is start.spring.io, Spring Initializer. Here, there are some options available in order to create the boot application. First one, what type of project you want to create? I want to create a Maven project. What is the language you want to use? Java, Kotlin, Groovy. I want to go with the Java language. Spring Boot version. What is the latest stable version? 3.1.5. What is group ID? Your company domain. In.Ashok.IT. Artifact ID, your project name. I'm giving my group ID as in.Ashok.IT. I'm giving my artifact ID as 01 Spring Boot application name, description, package name. In your project, what is the default package you want to create? In.Ashok.IT, a default package I'm creating. What is the packaging type? jar or var. If you want standalone project, go for jar. If you want web application, go for var. Now, which version of Java? For Spring Boot, we are using 3.1.5. If you are using Spring Boot 3.x version, Java 17 is mandatory. You need to use Java 17. It is supporting for Java 21 also. I'm going with Java 17. So these are the options. Now, if you want any POM starters, you need to add the dependencies here. Currently, it is saying no dependency selected. If you want to add the dependency, click on add and search for that. Lombok dependency, Spring Web dependency is available. Spring Web dependency, Spring Web Services available. Timeleaf is available. Spring Security is available. So what are the dependencies that are required for the project? You can add the dependencies here. Let me add one simple dependency called web dependency. What is the meaning of this web dependency? You can build a web application, REST API using Spring MVC. So Spring Boot internally using Spring MVC module to develop the web application. And it is providing Apache Tomcat as the default container. Select this dependency, guys. So like this, we can select multiple dependencies. If you don't want, you can delete from here. If you want to add, you can add from here. Now you can type web. Spring Web dependency I'm adding. So fine. Maven project with the Java language, boot to 3.1.5 version, group ID is in.Ashok.IT, artifact ID 01 Spring Boot application, package name I'm giving as in.Ashok.IT. Now packaging type is jar, Java version is 17. Dependency I'm selecting as a web dependency. Now here there are options. You want to give this project for someone, then you have share option. Okay. If you want to see what folders we are getting in the project, explore option is available. If you want to download the project, generate option is available. So we are having three options here. If I click on share option, it is generating a link, guys. Now, this is the link to download our project. Whatever the options we have selected, the options are added to this URL as a query parameter. So if you access this URL in the browser, project will be downloaded. Project will be downloaded. If you want to see what files will be created in the project, you can go for explore option. When you click on explore, it is showing like this. A Maven project will be created. pom.xml file will be created like this. We are adding web starter. By default, it is giving test starter Java version 17 it is using. If you go to SRC, one Java class will be created by default. That is called start class in the Spring Boot, which is entry point for boot application execution. And we are having one properties file. If you want to configure database properties, SMTP properties, any application messages, you can use this application.properties file. So this is the Spring Boot application folder structure. So now I want to download this project. I'm creating by using initializer website. Click on generate. When I click on generate, the application will be downloaded as a zip file. Application is downloaded as a zip file. Now go here, go to downloads. My project is downloaded as a zip file. Extract that zip file. Now I got the project. Now I need to import this project into IDE to start the development. So I'm creating project by using initializer website. I have downloaded that project. It is downloaded as a zip file. You need to extract that zip file and you need to import that project into your IDE. It can be Eclipse or it can be STS or it can be IntelliJ also. Any IDE is fine. Now let us see how to import that. Here I am using STS IDE. Go to file. Now there is an option called import option. Click on import. What kind of project we created? Maven project. So here there is option existing Maven projects. Select that. Click on next. Root directory. Where is your project pom.xml available? Go to that location. Browse. Downloads. 01 Spring Boot application. Inside that one more folder. Here we need to select this inside folder. Where the pom.xml available, up to that location you have to select it. Then click on select folder. It should recognize pom.xml of our project. Then click on finish. Now, so with this you can see I'm able to import that project into my IDE. So now you can see the folder structure. SRC main Java. What is the meaning of SRC main Java? All the source code we are going to create here. SRC main resources, configuration files we are going to keep in the resources folder. SRC test Java, unit test classes we will create here. Maven dependencies. What are the jars downloaded by Spring Boot? We can see under Maven dependencies. And the next one, target. Our dot class files will be created in the target. And the next one, pom.xml. This is our Maven configuration file. pom.xml is Maven configuration file. Java 17 version we are using. Group ID web starter. What is the purpose of web starter? To develop a web application by using Spring MVC. If you want to develop a web application by using Spring Boot, then we are going to use web starter. Perfect. Now in the Spring Boot application, by default one Java class will be created. That Java class contains main method. This, whether it is a standalone application or whether it is a web application, in the Spring Boot, main method is mandatory. Guys, we have seen core Java. When you are learning core Java, you developed some Java classes. When you are learning core Java, you developed some Java classes. Every core Java application will start from the main method. When you develop servlet application, web application, do you have a main method in the servlet? For web application, main method is not required when you go for servlet. But when it comes to the Spring Boot, whether it is a standalone or whether it is a web application, main method is a mandatory to run the application. So Spring Boot application execution will start from the main method. So here the class which contains this main method, this class is called as start class in the Spring Boot. What is that? Start class in the Spring Boot. Spring Boot start class is an entry point for boot application execution. When you run the Spring Boot application, the execution will begin from this class only. In this class, main method is available. That is the entry point for application execution. Good. Next one, in the resources folder, there is a properties file is available. What is that properties file? Application.properties. What is the purpose of application.properties? Come on. What is the purpose of application.properties? To configure application configuration properties. With which database you want to communicate. You configure database properties here. I want to send a email from my application. Configure email properties here. I want to configure success messages, failure messages in the application. Instead of hard coding in the Java program, we can configure the properties in the properties file. Okay, so are you clear with application.java and application.properties? What is application.java? Come on, what is application.java? Application.java is a start class. Application.java is a start class. What is the start class in the Spring Boot? Entry point for the boot application execution main method. What is application.properties? A file where we can configure properties of our application like database properties, SMTP, messages, success messages, failure messages, we can configure in that. And if you scroll down, there is one class called application test.java. This is for JUnit unit testing. If you want to perform unit testing of your application, then we are going to configure in the application test.java. Okay, whenever you create a Spring Boot application, we are getting one start class. The name of the start class will be application.java. Along with this, we are getting one file called application.properties. Along with this, we are getting one test class that is called application test.java. So application.java is a start class in the Spring Boot, entry point for the execution, properties file to configure messages in the application, test Java to perform unit testing. So with this, we are able to create the project. Now, can we run this project? Can we run this project? From where we need to run? From the start class. You can do one thing. You can right click on the project, run as Spring Boot application. So you can right click on the project, run as Spring Boot application. When you run this, it will check for the start class and it will execute that. Now you see application starting, Tomcat server initialized with 8080, embedded application context, IOC container started. Finally, Tomcat started with the port number 8080. So am I starting the Tomcat server? Then why Tomcat is coming here? Why we are getting the Tomcat? Tomcat is a embedded server in the Spring Boot. You no need to do any server setup in the Spring Boot. Boot will take care of the server. That concept is called as embedded server. That concept is called as embedded server. Perfect. Yesterday, some people came to me saying that, sir, in my system, already Oracle database is available with the 8080. So I'm not able to start the Spring Boot application because Spring Boot application using Tomcat, Tomcat also using 8080 port number, Oracle also using 8080 port number. Getting my point? Two applications cannot run on the same port number. So what we need to do? We need to change the Tomcat port number. So do you know how to change the Tomcat port number? How to change? Server.xml. If you download the Tomcat, but am I downloading the Tomcat? Who is starting this Tomcat? Do I have Tomcat server here? Can I see the Tomcat server? No. Why? Because it is a embedded server. In the advanced Java, we downloaded the Tomcat, we installed the Tomcat, we can see conf folder, we can see server.xml to change the port number. But here, is it our server or it is providing by Spring Boot? It is providing by Spring Boot. So do we have server.xml? No, we don't have server.xml to change the, are you getting my point? If you download the Tomcat server, then you can see server.xml, you can change the port number. But in this application, am I downloading the Tomcat or am using embedded Tomcat? Embedded Tomcat. What is the meaning of embedded Tomcat? That will be providing by Spring Boot, not our server. That server provided by Spring Boot. Now, by default, Spring Boot is starting Tomcat server with port number 8080. Now we need to tell to Spring Boot, boss, don't use 8080, use 9090 or use 8081. So we need to tell to Spring Boot application to use different port number for the Tomcat. The default port number we are getting as a 8080. I don't want 8080. I want a different port number. That's where we are going to this properties file. In this properties file, we will configure server.port. Server.port is equal to 9090. If you just configure a property, server.port is equal to 9090, then Spring Boot will start the Tomcat server with 9090 port number. Are you getting my point? So if you go for physical server, if you go for external server, server.xml to change the port number. If you go for embedded server, server.port is equal to 9090. Now check this one. Run the application, run as boot application. Now you see the console. Now you see the console. What happened? Tomcat server starting with 8080 or it is starting with 9090? 9090. Why it is starting with 9090? I am telling to Spring Boot in the properties file. So who is reading that properties file? Who is reading? Boot. Boot is reading this properties file. It is understanding that programmer wants to start Tomcat server with the port number 9090. If you have Oracle in your system, then you need to configure like this. If you don't have Oracle in your system, no need of this, because you can start the Tomcat with the 8080 port number. Are you guys clear? Now, I'm able to create one Spring Boot application by using initializer website. Okay, so what is the process to create the boot application with the initializer website? Create a project, download that project, then extract that project, then import that project into IDE. Lot of work is there. Instead of that, can we directly create from the IDE? If I directly create from the IDE, what is the benefit? No need of downloading, no need of extracting, no need of importing. Directly you can create the project in the IDE. Now observe. Are you clear with initializer website? Any confusion? What is initializer website? What is initializer website? Respond. Guys, it's early morning session, that too winter, you will feel sleepy. So if you open your mouth, if you respond to my question, then you will understand the subject properly. Okay, so don't close your mouth. When I ask some question, answer that. Answer that so that you will not feel sleepy. Good. So how many ways we can create Spring Boot application? We can create the boot application in 2 ways. What are those 2 ways? One is by using initializer website. Second one is by using IDE. So when I go for initializer website, what is the process? When I go for initializer website, what is the process? Create that, download that, extract that, import that. So instead of doing 4 or 5 steps, can I create the project in the single step? Yes, for that I need to go for IDE. So which IDE we are using? STS. All of you able to set up STS IDE? Yes. Any issues, anyone? We downloaded a jar file. We downloaded STS IDE as a jar file. When we run that jar file, our IDE will be available. You can open that IDE. Now, if you go for Eclipse IDE, direct option will not be available to create the boot application. That's why I'm going for STS IDE. So go to File, New. What is this option? Spring Starter project. What is the meaning of Spring Starter? Boot application. Spring Starter nothing but boot application. Now, when I go for Spring Starter, what is this? What is this? Start.spring.io. What is the meaning of that? If you use IDE also, internally it is communicating with the initializer website only to create the project. So that means from my system, it is connecting to initializer website. That's why internet connection is a mandatory. So this is called distributed application. One project is communicating with the another project. So now this STS IDE is one Java project. STS IDE is a Java software. This software communicating with the another website, start.spring.io, which is in the US. So one application communicating with the another application. From one system, we are connecting to another system. For that, internet connection is required. So if you create a project by using IDE also, it will use initializer website only. Now, let me give the different name for that. 02 Spring Boot application. 02 Spring Boot application. Excuse me. Yeah, I want to create the second project. What is the type of the project? Maven. Packaging, jar. Version 17. Language, Java. Group ID, in.ashok IT. Artifact ID, project name. Package name, in.ashok IT. Next, which version of the Spring Boot? 3.1.5. Dependencies which are available. I want Tomcat server to develop a web application. What I will do? Spring Web dependency I want. I want a security for my project. I want security for my project. We are going to use Spring Security. Spring Web dependency, Spring Security dependency. Click on next and now you see the URL. Now click on finish. So we no need to download anything. We no need to import anything. Everything will be taken care by STS IDE. Now you see the project is created. Same structure. Here also start class will be available. Here also properties file will be available. Here also test class will be available. Are you good? What is this start class? What is this start class? Start class nothing but entry point for boot application execution. Start class nothing but entry point for boot application execution. What is this properties file? What is this properties file? Configuration. Any configuration you want to do, that can be done by using this properties file. What is this a test class? What is this test class? Unit testing. pom.xml. Pom.xml is a Maven configuration file. What are the dependencies? How many dependencies we selected? How many dependencies we selected? 2 dependencies we have selected. One is a web starter, another one is a security starter. What is the purpose of a web starter? What is the purpose of a web starter? To develop a web application. What is the purpose of security starter? What is the purpose of security starter? To provide authentication for our application. To secure our application, we are using security starter. Very good. I want to run Tomcat server with a 8080 port number. 8080 port number I want to use. What I need to do? No need to do anything. I no need to do anything. Why? When I run my application, by default it will use port number as 8080. I want to run it with a 8081. Where I need to configure? Server.port. Server.port is equal to 8081. Okay. This key is a fixed value, guys. If you don't know that key, control space. It will give you all the options. If you start typing with control space, it will give the suggestion. You no need to butify that. Now see, I don't know what is that. Control space. When I type control space, what happened? Suggestions. Auto suggestions. That is benefit with the IDE. Auto suggestion. Then I will start typing server.port. So it is giving me the option server.port is equal to 8081. Server.port I'm taking it as a 8081. How to run the boot application? How to run the boot application? Come on guys, right click on the project, run as boot application. So when you right click and run as a boot application, you can see that application started, security also added, password is generated for that. Okay, fine. So with this we are able to create our Spring Boot application and we are able to start our Spring Boot application. We are able to create Spring Boot application and we are able to start our Spring Boot application. So all of you able to create the boot projects. How many ways we can do this? In 2 ways. One is by using initializer website. Second one is by using IDE. If I create by using IDE, what is happening? Internally communicating with the initializer website only. So internet connection is mandatory. Internet connection is mandatory to create the Spring Boot applications. Are you clear with this? Any questions, anyone? Spring Boot, advantages with the Spring Boot, and how to create first application by using Spring Boot, and what are the files that are created in the Spring Boot application. When I create the boot application, mainly we are getting three things. One is a start class, another one is properties file, another one is test class. Now tell me, what is start class in Spring Boot? What is start class in Spring Boot? Start class is entry point for boot application execution. What is start class in Spring Boot? Start class is entry point for boot application execution. For Spring Boot application execution, that start class is mandatory. Start class is also called as main class in the Spring Boot. Start class is also called as main class in Spring Boot. It is called as main class in the Spring Boot. What is there in the start class? Now, if you go to our start class in the Spring Boot, you can see that there is a main method. And in the main method, what we are doing? In the main method, what we are doing? Spring application dot run method. We are calling Spring application dot run method. And here there is one annotation also available. What is this annotation? @Spring Boot application. Now, lot of story we need to discuss related to this start class. What is this annotation? What is this run method? Damn sure interview questions. What is the start class in the Spring Boot? How run method will work in the Spring Boot? What is the purpose of Spring Boot application annotation? We need to understand internals of these things. Okay, fine. First one, there is one annotation is available which is called Spring Boot application, and inside the main method, what is there? Run method is available. Suppose if I remove this annotation, if I remove this run method, it is like a normal Java class. It is like a normal Java class run as Java application. When I run this as a Java application, anything is happening. IOC container not starting. IOC container not starting. Then Tomcat server not starting. Security is also not available. It is executing like a normal core Java class with the main method. So where is the magic now? Where is the magic now? We are getting lot of configurations from the Spring Boot. It is starting IOC container. It is starting Tomcat server. It is printing some messages on the console. It is printing some messages on the console, and it is starting the IOC container. It is starting the Tomcat server. It is providing the security also for our application. Where is that logic now? If I remove these things, now, are we able to see that output? No. That means, what is the conclusion? What is the conclusion now? Guys, here from the start class, if I remove the run method, nothing is happening in our application. If I remove run method from the start class, if I am not calling that run method, Spring Boot is not doing anything. Okay. If I call run method from the main method, then if I run my application, it is doing lot of things. It is doing lot of things, right? Now here annotation @boot application. So run as Spring Boot application. If I run this, now you can see this port number already in use. Stop it. Okay. Now right click, run as boot application. Now lot of things are happening internally when we are calling run method. Now, can we see what is that run method? Can we see what is that run method? Inside the run method, lot of code is available. That code is provided by framework. Inside the run method, lot of code is available. That code is provided by framework. Now, go inside this run method, press control, go inside the run method. Where this run method is available? Run method is a static method which is available in Spring application class. So this Spring application class, is it our class? Is it Spring Boot class? Inside the Spring Boot, there is a class called Spring application class. Inside that Spring application class, run method is available. Let us do postmortem for the run method. We need to do the postmortem for the run method to understand what logic is available inside the run method. If you understand the run method, now you can understand how auto configuration is happening, how Tomcat server is starting, how Tomcat server is starting. Everything we can understand if you see the run method available in the Spring Boot. It is a damn sure interview question. What is a run method in the Spring Boot? What is the functionality of the run method in the Spring Boot? Whenever you create a boot application, start class will be created. Start class is entry point for the boot application. Inside the start class, main method will be available. Inside that main method, we are calling Spring application dot run method. Go inside that run method. Now, inside this run method, they are calling one more run method. Go inside this run method. Again, they are calling run method. Go in. This is the logic that is available inside the run method. With this logic, all this auto configuration, all this server starting, security, everything we are getting. IOC container starting, everything is available inside this run method. Now, if you see, there is an option called create application context. What is this option, guys? Create application context. Inside the run method, they have implemented some logic. Inside the run method, they implemented some logic to create a IOC container. Okay, so whenever you execute the boot application, it will start from the main method. Inside the main method, we are calling Spring application.run method. If you go to that run method, you can see that there is a logic. Lot of logic is available. So this logic provided by the framework, because this logic is common for everybody. This logic is common for everybody. Can you see this one? What they are doing here? When this run method is started, they are maintaining start time of that method. They are maintaining start time of that method. Creating the bootstrap context to load the classes which are available in the Spring Boot. They are creating one bootstrap context. They are starting some listeners. Then after, they are preparing the environment. Then they are printing the banner. Banner nothing but whenever you run the boot application, that boot logo is printing here. That is called banner. To print the banner, there is a logic available. After the banner is printed, what is this line? 313 line number, can you read it? Here, they are starting the IOC container. So if you go for Spring Framework, you need to start the IOC container. But when you go for Spring Boot, run method will start the IOC container. Are you clear? Once IOC container started, they will prepare the context, they will refresh the context, then they are writing time taken to start up. Here, start time is available, here, end time is available, they will do minus. So, end time minus start time. Total time taken to start the IOC container. Are you clear? So, here, whenever the run method is called, they are noting down what is the start time of the run method. Then they are creating some context, they are creating listeners, they are starting the listeners, they are running the listeners, they are printing the banner, they are creating the IOC object, they are starting the IOC container, they are preparing the IOC container. Once the IOC container is prepared, they are identifying what is the time it has taken, end time minus start time. They will tell you total time taken to start your application. Application started in 1.2 seconds. How they are understanding it is taking 1.2 seconds? Here is the logic. Start time and end time. End time minus start time, total time taken to start our application. Once that IOC container started, then they are calling some runners. There is a concept called runner. In the Spring Boot, runner concept is available. Runner concept means if you want to execute any logic once your application started, then you can go for runner concept. We'll discuss. It is a separate topic for us. Just I'm telling you the concept name. So remember in your mind, keep that in your mind. Once IOC container started, run method will call the runners. What is runner? Why runner? How to work with runner? Where to use a runner in the application? We will discuss that in the separate session. Okay? It will take one day to understand what is a runner. So just remember, once IOC container started, runners will be executed. Runners are used to execute any logic only one time once IOC container started. Once IOC container started, if you want to execute any logic only one time, then you can go for runner. Who is executing that runner? Run method is executing the runner. Once the runner's execution got completed, then finally IOC container is returning context object. So what is that context? IOC object. So earlier in the Spring application, what we have done? In the Spring application, we have done like this. Application context. Context is equal to new class path XML application context. New class path XML application context. We have given beans.xml. What is the return type of this? When I'm creating an object, where I am storing that context variable. What is the type of the context variable? Application context. Can I say this is IOC container object? Can I say it is IOC container object? If I write the code like this, who is creating IOC object? Programmer. Programmer is starting the IOC container. Programmer storing that IOC object into context variable. But if I go for Spring Boot, who is creating the IOC container object? Run method. Now, once the run method logic is executed, that run method will return context object. Run method will return context object. So, what is the return type of the run method? IOC container object. You no need to start the IOC container. Run method will start the IOC container. That run method will give you IOC container object for you. Let us store the run method return type into a variable. Control 1, enter. I got the return type of the method. It is a shortcut. Okay. So instead of you are writing manually, just I will use Control 1, enter. It is storing run method return type into a variable. What is the return type of the run method? Come on guys. What is the return type of the run method? Run method return type is a configurable application context. What is this configurable application context? It is IOC object. So here we are starting our boot application from the main method. Inside the main method, we are calling the run method. What that run method is doing, let's understand now. So if you go for Spring Boot start class, here run method will be available. This is very important method in the Spring Boot. This is very important method in the Spring Boot. The complete boot application execution will start from the run method. If there is no run method, there is no Spring Boot. Clear? If you don't call the run method from the main method, nothing will happen. IOC container will not start. Without IOC container, there is no Spring. Nothing will happen. So calling that run method is a mandatory from the main method. What this run method is doing here? This run method taking start time. It is noting down what is the start time of the application. After starting this, after noting down the start time, create bootstrap context. That means whatever the framework classes are available, those classes it is going to load by using this bootstrap context. After that, it is going to load listeners. What are the listeners available? It is going to load the listeners. After the listeners are loaded, it is going to start the listeners. Listener means they will listen to our action and they will perform some operation. If the application started, then start the Tomcat server. If a web starter is available, start the Tomcat server. If a security starter is available, provide the login page for the application. So listener will listen to one event and they will perform some action. So here listeners are available in the Spring Boot. After this, our run method will create IOC container. Create the IOC container. After creating the IOC container, it is going to prepare the IOC container. So what are the beans available? Load the beans, create the objects. Before going to create the IOC container, it will print a banner. It is going to print banner. What is the meaning of printing the banner? What is the meaning of printing the banner? The logo. The Spring logo is printing on the console. The Spring logo is printing on the console. That is called banner. Once the banner printing is completed, it will start IOC container. Once IOC container started, it will prepare the IOC container to perform the dependency injection. What is IOC? Come on. What is IOC? IOC is a principle which is used to perform dependency injection. Who is starting IOC container? Programmer is starting or Spring Boot is starting? Spring Boot is starting. Where is the logic to start the IOC container in the Spring Boot? Where is the logic to start IOC container in the Spring Boot? Inside the run method. From where we are calling the run method? From the main method. Where is that main method? Start class. What is that start class? Entry point for boot application execution. Are you clear? Once this IOC container is prepared, end time. Once the IOC container prepared, end time. So end time minus start time. What it will tell? Total time it has taken to run our application. Total time it has taken to start our application, it is going to identify. Once this end time is identified, then it is going to call runners. What is the purpose of runners in the Spring Boot? To execute any logic only one time, that Spring Boot is going to call the runners. Once the runners are executed, finally it will return IOC object. What is the last logic in the run method, guys? It is going to return the object of IOC container. Why we need that IOC container? To get the bean objects. To get the bean object. Okay, these all are the logics that are executed inside the run method. Okay, what the run method is doing? It will calculate the start time. It will create the bootstrap context. It will load the listeners in the application. It will start the listeners available in the application. It is going to print the banner available, print the banner on the console. Spring logo, it is printing as a banner. It is creating the IOC container. It is preparing the object of the IOC container. Then it is calculating end time of the application. That means total time taken to start the application. Then it is going to call the runners in the application. Finally, it is going to return IOC container. This is internal logic of the run method. What run method is doing in the Spring Boot? If anybody asks you, what is the run method in the Spring Boot? You need to explain all this story. So run method is very important method in the Spring Boot, which will be called from the start class in the main method. Inside the run method, lot of logic is available. Whenever you call the run method, first it will note down what is the start time of the run method. Then it will create the bootstrap context to load the framework classes. Then it will start the listeners available in the application. Then it will print a banner on the console. Then it is going to start the IOC container. Then it will prepare the IOC container. Then it will call the runners available in the application. And finally, run method will return IOC container object. So what is the return type of the run method? IOC object. Where we are storing that IOC object? We are storing that IOC object by using IOC object by using configurable application context. Where we are storing that configurable application context. So what is this configurable application context? It is a class or it is an interface. It is a interface. What it is doing? What it is doing? Extending from the application context. Earlier what we have done? Directly we created the object for the IOC container. We stored that object into application context. Now, what the run method is giving? Configurable application context. So this is our IOC. Let us see here, system.out.println context dot. Now there are some methods available. Get bean method is available. Get bean type method is available. So there are several methods available here. Contains bean, equals, get bean method, get start update, get messages, is active, is running. Okay. Get to bean definition names. What are the bean definitions available? You can get that. Context dot bean definitions count. What is the meaning of bean definition count? How many beans are loaded by IOC container? Did I create any Spring Bean as of now? Did I create any Java class? No. I just created my project and I'm starting my project. That's it. So here I'm getting context dot get bean definition count. So what is the meaning of context dot bean definition count? How many classes loaded by IOC container? How many classes loaded by IOC container? We will understand. Okay, let me run my project now. Just to run this, stop the server. It is a web application. Stopping the server. Run as boot application. What happened? 171 classes already loaded by the Spring Boot. 171 classes already loaded by IOC container. What are those 171 classes? What are those one? Who developed those 171 classes? Those are predefined classes to provide auto configuration. So if this auto configuration is not available, in every project we need to write the logic to start the IOC container. We need to write the logic to perform the dependency injection and all that stuff. Instead of we are doing that, Spring Boot already developed classes to provide auto configuration for us. So to perform that auto configuration, they have loaded 171 classes already into IOC container. With those 171 classes, auto configuration will be available. You focus only on the business logic development. You focus only on the business logic development. Whatever the common logics are required, those common logics already provided by Spring Boot. Are you clear? Tell me, what is the run method in the Spring Boot? What is the run method in the Spring Boot? Run method is entry point for the boot application execution. Run method is performing lot of operations. Run method is performing lot of operations. What type of operations it is performing? It is identifying the time taken to start the application. It is creating the bootstrap context object. It is loading the listeners, starting the listeners, printing the banner, creating IOC container, preparing the IOC container, calling the runners and returning the IOC object, creating the IOC object. What is the return type of the run method, guys? What is the return type of the run method? The return type of the run method is a configurable application context. So as of now, how many classes loading by our IOC? 171 classes loaded by IOC. Let me do one thing. Spring Boot starter. What is that? I'm adding actuator. Spring Boot starter, actuator. Now let us see how many classes it is going to load. Refresh. Right click. Run as boot application. How many classes it is loading? 320 earlier. Now why it is loading more than 300? That means auto configuration will happen based on pom.xml. Okay. If I add the actuator to provide the actuators for the application, it is loading some classes. Okay. If I remove the actuator, it will load the classes required for web starter as well as security starter. Now, if I remove these two, security and actuator, I have only web starter. Now, stop the server and run the application. Right click, run as boot application. Now, how many classes loading? So always it is loading fixed number of classes, or number of classes are changing. When it is what classes it will load depends on Maven configuration. If you add web starter, so it should provide the server for you. To provide the server, it will load some classes. If you add the security starter, to provide the security for you, it will load some classes. If you add actuator, to provide the actuator benefits, it will load some classes. That means auto configuration will happen based on the dependencies you configure in the pom.xml. So can you tell me what is auto configuration? Come on guys, what is auto configuration? The configuration that is required to run our application will provided by Spring Boot based on pom.xml. I want a server, Boot is providing the server. I want connection pool, Boot will provide. I want security, Boot will provide. I want a database, Boot will provide. So there are so many advantages with the Spring Boot. The main advantage with the Spring Boot is auto configuration. Whatever the configuration that is required for our application will be provided by Spring Boot. How Spring Boot will know I need a server, I need a security, I need a connection pool? How Boot will understand that I need a server? Come on guys, respond. Based on the pom.xml. How Boot will understand my project requires a connection pool? If you add JPA starter, it will get the connection pool. If you add the web starter, it will give the Tomcat. If you add the security starter, it will give you login page. So based on our pom.xml, Boot is providing auto configuration for us. Because of this auto configuration, we can focus only on the business logic development and we can achieve rapid application development. What is the meaning of rapid application development? Quickly we can set up our application and we can run our application. So that's why in the industry, in the Java community, Spring Boot is very famous. Without using Spring Boot, nobody will develop a project in the industry nowadays. If there are some legacy projects, Spring projects, Struts projects, they are also migrated to Spring Boot because of its advantages. Are you guys clear? Perfect. Next one. So here, earlier, when we go for the Spring framework, we created object for the IOC container by using class path XML application context. Now, am I creating the object? I am not creating the object now. I'm not creating the object. I want to understand which class is used by Spring Boot to create the object for the IOC container. So am I able to get the IOC container from the Spring Boot? IOC is starting by Spring Boot and I'm getting the IOC container from the Spring Boot. Who is giving IOC container for us? Who is giving the IOC container for us? Who is starting IOC container? Your answer is correct. Say with confidence. Run method. IOC container is creating by run method. Who is giving the IOC for us? Run method only. Run method only creating the IOC. Run method only returning the IOC container. Okay. Now, this IOC container is available in the form of interface. I want to understand which class it is using internally to start the IOC container. Are you getting my point? Yes. System.out.println context.getClass.getName. What is the meaning of context.getClass.getName? To understand which class it is using to start the IOC container. Are you able to follow me? Earlier, which class we used to start IOC? Class path XML application context. Now I want to understand Spring Boot is using which class to start the IOC container? I got the context object, context.getClass.getName. Right click, run as boot application. See that? What is the class it is using to start the IOC? My God, very lengthy class name. Annotation config servlet web server application context. That is a predefined class in the Spring Boot which is used to start the IOC container. So earlier we started IOC container by using class path XML application context because we are giving XML file as the input to start the IOC container. But in the Spring Boot, any XML file? No. We are going to use everything as a annotation base. Annotation config servlet web server application context. This is the class which is using by the Spring Boot to start the IOC container. Are you clear? And this is always Spring Boot will not use this class to start the IOC. So if I go into internals of the Spring Boot, is this okay? So for the fresher, this much is not required. But when you are attending the interview with the experience, you need to know each and everything. Because in the interview, they will ask all these questions. How the IOC container is starting. Which class it is using to start the IOC container. Now I am able to understand which class it is using to start the IOC container. But see now, I will make some changes in the pom.xml. Now observe. What is the class it is going to use? I will remove the web. I'm removing the web. Now, what is the starter available? Just boot starter is available, not web starter. When we need web starter? When we need web starter to develop a web application. I don't want web application. I want a standalone application. I don't want web starter. I want standalone application. Okay, good. Run this. Run as boot application. Now Tomcat will not come. Now what is the class it is using this time? Annotation config application. So always it is using the same class to start the IOC? No. So if I use just to boot starter, it is using annotation config application context. If I use a web starter, it is using web server application context to start the IOC. Let me do some change in the pom.xml. This time I will go for, what is that? I'm adding a starter called web flags. Now run this. What is the class name? That means in the Spring Boot, there are 3 different classes available to start the IOC container. So based on the situation, it will use any one of the class to start the IOC container. That means run method will start the IOC container based on type of the application we create. Okay. If you create a standalone project in the Spring Boot, then it will use annotation config application context to start the IOC container. So when you go for web starter, Spring Boot will use this second class to start the IOC container. When you go for WebFlux starter, it will use the last class to start the IOC container. If anybody asks you how IOC container will start in the Spring Boot, you need to answer this. It depends on the starter you add in the pom.xml. If you just add boot starter, it will use this class to start the IOC container. If you add web starter, it will use this class to start the IOC container. If you use the WebFlux starter, it will use this class to start the IOC container. Are you guys clear? Yes. Who is starting IOC container? Run. It's the Spring Boot application completely dependent on the starters. The Spring Boot application execution completely depends on the starter. If you add the starter, for that auto configuration will come. If you add the starter, the classes will be loaded by the Spring Boot. So based on the starter, it is deciding what type of class, which class it has to use to start the IOC container. Everything we need to manage in the pom.xml by using pom starters. Without pom starters, we can't do anything in the Spring Boot. Are you clear with my point? Yes. So who is starting IOC and how that IOC is starting in the Spring Boot? Come on. Run method is starting the IOC. Okay, now observe. If you add Spring Boot starter, then it will use below class to start IOC container. Okay, so this is the class name. This is the class name. For example, if I add Spring Boot starter web dependency, if I add Spring Boot starter web, then it will use below classes to start the IOC container. For example, if I add WebFlux starter, Spring Boot starter WebFlux, then it will use below class to start the IOC. Okay, now guys, see here. When you want to develop a standalone application by using Spring Boot, then we are going to use the first starter, that is Spring Boot starter web dependency. Sorry, when you want to develop a simple standalone application, then web is not required, WebFlux is not required. Just we are going with the Spring Boot starter. When you go for the Spring Boot starter, IOC container will start with annotation config application context and it will return from the run method. Suppose if you want to create a web application, then you need to add the web starter. Why we need to, when to add the web starter in the Spring Boot? When to add the web starter in the Spring Boot? If you want to develop a web application. Then you need to add the web starter. When you add the web starter, what is happening? Annotation config servlet web application context class it is using to start the IOC container. Third one is WebFlux. This WebFlux concept introduced in the Spring 5.x version, which supports reactive programming. Currently in the market, the trending is reactive programming. Spring Boot supporting for the reactive programming from the Spring 5.x version. In order to work with the reactive programming, then you need to go for WebFlux starter. When you go for WebFlux starter, what is the class it is using to start the IOC container? Annotation config reactive web server application context. That means which class it has to use to start the IOC container, it depends on the starter you add in the pom.xml. Now, I have a question. If I add all these three starters, if I add normal starter, one class it is using. If I add web starter, some other class it is using. If I add WebFlux starter, reactive class it is using to start the IOC. Now, I have added all the three starters in the project. If I add all the three starters, which class it will use to start the IOC container? Come on, guess that. If I add all the three, it will use first class or second class or third class? First class, third class. Huh? I am adding all three starters in the pom.xml. Which class it will use to start the IOC? Ambiguity problem? No. All three it will use? No. Can we check that? You are clear, right? How the IOC is starting now? Run method is starting the IOC container. Which class it is using to start the IOC container? Depends on the starter. If I add just this normal starter for standalone application, this class it is using to start the IOC. If I add boot starter web dependency, it is using web server application context. Annotation config web server application context class to start the IOC. If I add WebFlux starter, it is using reactive application context to start the IOC. Now, let me stop my application. Let me add all the 3 starters. Online students, any guess? Online students, any guess? Come on. Which class it is used? Will use to start IOC? First one, second one or third one? Third one. Some people are saying first one, some people are saying last one. Okay, good. Check that. Remove this. Remove this. Clear? Here I am using normal starter. This starter is used to develop standalone application. This starter is used to develop a web application. This starter is used to develop reactive application. What is reactive? We'll discuss in the coming classes. Good. One more last chance. 1, 2 or 3? 3. 1. It is using second one. If you add all the 3, which one? People, nobody told that second. Everybody told that first one or third one. But what it is using? Second one it is using to start the IOC container. Are you clear? Why it is using second one? That is the logic they have implemented. So if you add web or web starter, all 3, it will use second one. If you add only web flex, then reactive. If you add only web, annotation config web application context. If you add normal starter, annotation config application context, it is using to start the IOC container. Sir, where is that logic available? That logic is available in the Spring application class. That is a predefined class, right? Inside this class, that logic will be available. What type of class it has to use to start the IOC container. So run method is available, and in this class, the lot of code is available to decide which class it has to use to start the IOC container. Are you clear? What is the run method? What is the purpose of run method? What is run method? What is the purpose of run method? Come on. What is run method? What is the purpose of run method? Run method is entry point for boot application. Now, in the main method, can I remove this run method array? I don't need this. I want to execute only main method. If you remove the run method, what will happen? It will execute like a normal Java class. It will not execute like a Spring Boot application. So calling that run method is mandatory. Calling that run method is mandatory. What is the return type of the run method? Configurable application context. What is configurable application context? Interface. That is referring the IOC object. That configurable application context interface reference variable will hold implementation class object. That implementation class object is used to start the IOC container. Who is starting that IOC container? Run method is starting the IOC container. Are you clear? With this, we got 50% clarity on the start class. The remaining 50% clarity we will get in the tomorrow's class. Because as of now, we just understood what is start class, what is main method, what is run method, what is there inside the run method, what is the return type of the run method. Tomorrow, we need to understand what is this annotation, what is the purpose of this annotation. If this annotation is not available, what will happen? What is the problem if I don't write this annotation in the start class? Are you clear? Whatever the topic that I explained today, in the YouTube, already I have uploaded that video. What is this Spring Boot? If you go to our playlist, even. So if you go to this video, 3 hours in Spring Boot in 3 hours. So in this video, I think first 40 minutes I explained about what is Spring Boot, how to create a Spring Boot application. Now, Spring Boot route map. So here I explained in the route map. Let me show you. What is that? So here I explained what is Spring Boot, how to create the project by using Spring Boot, internals of Spring Boot. So in this part, I explained what is run method, how that run method will work internally, what is that start class, what is the purpose of the start class, what is that Spring Boot application annotation, what is the purpose of that annotation, I have explained in that video. And even I explained what is the banner in the Spring Boot, how to change the banner also. Okay. So now, and apart from this, I have given a separate playlist also for that. Anything we'll give for free, people will not accept it, right? Playlist. Now, if you go to playlist, I will show you. Spring Boot playlist I have given. In that Spring Boot playlist, I have given all those videos. Whatever we are discussing today, what we discussed yesterday, what we are going to discuss tomorrow. Spring Boot tutorials already available. In this Spring Boot tutorial, the first video, Spring versus Spring Boot. 3 years back, I have uploaded this video. What is the Spring? What is Spring Boot? What is the difference between Spring and Spring Boot? Then second video, how to create Spring Boot application by using initializer website and by using IDE, and building Spring Boot application by using STS IDE. Spring Boot application start class. Spring Boot start class run method execution details. What run method is doing internally. So I have shown you with practically. Same thing that we discussed today. What is that run method? How that, here is the logic. I told you, right? Which class it is going to use to start the IOC container. Based on this logic, it will decide the class name to start the IOC container. What is this method? Create application context. If the type is application is a web application type, it will use web context class. If it is a reactive class, it will use reactive context. If it is not web, if it is not reactive, it will use annotation config application context to start the IOC container. This logic is available in the start class. Then the next video, I explained internals of boot application annotation. That is what we are going to learn tomorrow. That is what we are going to learn tomorrow. What is this Spring Boot application annotation? I will share these videos in the group. Just go through that. Here, the topic I explained in the 15 minutes. Tomorrow we will spend around 1 hour, 1 hour 30 minutes for the same topic. In the YouTube, short and crispy. In the class, detailed discussion we are going to have. After that, I have given one more video. How to work with the banner in the Spring Boot. How to work with banner in the Spring Boot. So the next 2 to 3 days, what you are going to learn, already they are available in the YouTube. Okay, guys. So I want you people to go through that video so that you will get the better clarity. Once again, if you listen to that topic in the class. Good. I will share that videos in the WhatsApp group. Okay, good. So today we understood how to create a boot application by using initializer website, how to create boot application by using STS IDE, and we understood Spring Boot application folder structure. What is the start class? What is the purpose of the start class? What is the run method? What is the run method? So what is start class in the Spring Boot? How IOC will be starting in Spring Boot? How IOC container will be starting in the Spring Boot? So IOC container will be started by using run method. In the Spring Boot, run method will start IOC container based on form starter. In Spring Boot, run method will start IOC container based on the form starter, right? Run method will return IOC reference, IOC object. Run method will return IOC object. So here I have given the logic. If you add boot starter, then it will use this class to start the IOC. If you add the web starter, it will use this class to start the IOC. If you add webplex starter, it will use this class to start the IOC container. So I will give that video also about the run method. Go through that before coming to tomorrow's class. So tomorrow we will understand about this annotation. So in this annotation, you will understand what is auto configuration. How it is performing the auto configuration, we will understand in the tomorrow session. Is this clear? Any questions, anyone? Let me upload the notes in the website. All of you able to access the notes? Videos not able to. Guys, don't think that videos are available now. We can miss live classes. Videos watching is boring. Live class will be interactive. If you depend on the videos, you can't learn the subject. After watching for 15 minutes, you will not get the interest to watch the video. Don't miss the live sessions. Even though if you have backup videos, don't miss the live classes. So Spring Boot is started from today. The next 3 months, very, 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 very important. Definitely, after this Spring Boot microservice course is completed, you are equal to 3+ years experienced developer. That much content you are going to learn. With internals in detail, with real-time use cases, we are going to understand the subject. So don't miss the Spring Boot microservices classes, because this subject is very, very important to get the job. Got it? Good. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow. Online students, any questions, anyone? Online students, anybody having any questions?
Yeah. Hello, sir.
If anybody having any question, you can unmute and you can ask me.
Yeah. Hello, sir. Good morning.
Venkatesh,
Hello?
I can't hear you, sir.
Okay. Are you able to hear me now? Are you able
Guys,
to
can you
hear
please
me now,
type
sir?
your question? I think there is a mic issue with me. I am not able to hear your voice.
Okay. Okay.
Hi Ashok, can you hear me? Hello? Anybody can hear me?
Yes, you are.
From
You are
CLI,
able to
you
hear.
can create the boot application. No, CLI support is removed to create the boot application.
In
Now
which
you can
version it
create
was
by
removed?
using initializer website, and you can create by using IDE. From the CLI, the support is removed.
Okay. And Spring Boot starter
Port
parent
number can be
earlier we used to have.
any 4-digit random number. Yes. Port number, you can keep any 4-digit random number. No problem. Good. Do we have only 3 starter classes?
Hello.
Yes, maybe I think I have a mic issue, so I'm not understanding your questions. Tomorrow I will clarify your questions. Okay.
Hello. I'm audible, sir.
Good. Thank you, guys. Tomorrow I will take your questions.
Sarah's mic issue. Tomorrow we will discuss.
Okay.
What runners are going to do? I will explain the runners in a separate class. What is runner? Why we need to go for runner? You will understand that. So any questions you guys have for today, please post in the group, guys. So tomorrow I will answer that. I think I have a mic issue today. I can't hear your voice. Tomorrow I will clarify. So as of now, any questions, if you have, just post in the group so that you will not forget that for tomorrow's session. We have a WhatsApp group for discussion. Post your questions in the group today. Okay. Thank you, guys. With this, I'm stopping for today. We'll meet tomorrow at same time.